faithfully conveying value and interpreting great books from around the world. Hi, this is Sally's Book Talk. Today, I'll be interpreting the book Brain Gym for you. People want a strong brain, so they've developed many mental activities to boost brain power, like meditation, memory exercises, and crossword puzzles. The author of this book, Anders Hansen, points out that besides mental activities, physical exercise also has a big impact on the brain. Many scientific studies prove that physical exercise not only strengthens the body, but also improves mood, boosts cognitive abilities like memory and creativity, making the brain more agile and efficient, even better than various mental activities. Hansen is an internist and psychiatry expert at Sweden's Karolinska Institute. He's also Sweden's chief mental health expert and a science writer, having won Sweden's Health Award of the Year twice. By Karolinska, his book Brain Gym has been translated into 12 languages and is a bestseller, with global sales exceeding 750,000 copies. Carl Johan Sundberg, a medical committee member of the International Olympic Committee, praised the book for bringing us cutting-edge scientific findings on the brain and exercise in an exciting and insightful way. The book has 10 chapters. Hansen combines the latest findings in brain science to detail the huge impact of physical exercise on the brain and its principles. Some of these effects are immediate and can be seen even after just one run or walk. Now, I'll break it down into two parts to interpret the main content of the book for you. First, how exercise improves mood. Second, how exercise enhances cognitive abilities. Let's start with the first part, how exercise improves mood. The author introduces two benefits of exercise for mood. The first benefit is enhancing stress resilience. First, let's explain how stress is generated. There's a part in the brain called the amygdala, whose role is to detect threats and sound the alarm. When we face crises and challenges, the amygdala becomes active, making us feel stressed. The amygdala also triggers the secretion of various stress hormones, one of the most important being cortisol. Well, cortisol causes the heart to beat faster, blood pressure to rise, and muscles to tense up, putting the body in a state of high alert, ready to fight or flee. At the same time, the rise in cortisol further stimulates the amygdala, making it more active. So, stress can easily snowball and get bigger. If this stress response cycles without restriction, people will experience intense panic, fall into negative emotions, and be unable to think calmly. However, the brain's hippocampus and frontal lobe can suppress the amygdala's overreaction. If we think of the amygdala as the gas pedal for stress response, then the hippocampus and frontal lobe are the brakes. Exercise can improve the inhibitory function of the hippocampus and frontal lobe, enhancing stress resilience. First, let's discuss exercise's effect on the hippocampus. Under stress, secreted cortisol kills hippocampal cells. Chronic stress with elevated cortisol causes hippocampal atrophy, gradually weakening its inhibition of the amygdala. This leads to persistent stress and panic, while exercise effectively lowers cortisol levels. When we run, swim, or play sports, cortisol levels rise. This happens because physical exertion stresses the body. Muscles need more energy and oxygen to function properly. After exercise ends, cortisol levels drop back to normal. Scientists found consistent exercisers show smaller cortisol spikes during activity and faster post-exercise declines. This benefit extends to non-exercise stressors too. Regular exercisers maintain lower cortisol levels when facing life or work stress. The author attributes this to exercise-triggered release of pleasure chemicals like endorphins and dopamine. After sustained exercise, the brain associates increased heart rate and blood pressure with positive emotions rather than panic, significantly reducing stress responses. In other words, exercise boosts the brain's stress tolerance, teaching it to avoid overreactions and maintain lower cortisol levels. This reduces cortisol's stimulation of the amygdala while protecting the hippocampus from damage. Remarkably, these cortisol effects can appear after just one workout. In one experiment, scientists had one group cycle for 30 minutes, while another did gentler exercises without raising heart rates. And so, after activities like stretching, both groups underwent a stress-inducing test. Results show that the cycling group had lower cortisol levels when facing stress. And other physiological indicators of stress, such as heart rate and blood pressure, were also lower. Now, let's talk about exercise's impact on the frontal lobe. The frontal lobe is located behind the forehead in the cerebral cortex and is where the brain performs rational thinking. Through its calming influence, the amygdala can settle down, right? For example, when a passenger experiences turbulence on a plane, they might have a fleeting thought of a crash, feeling stressed and panicked. This is the amygdala sounding the alarm. At this point, the frontal lobe sends a rational voice, telling the passenger that this is just normal turbulence, encountered before, and not to worry excessively. Then the passenger relaxes. Exercise benefits the frontal lobe significantly. First, during exercise, the frontal lobe gets more blood flow, promoting new blood vessel growth. This improves blood and oxygen supply, removes metabolic waste better, and boosts frontal lobe efficiency. Second, exercise strengthens connections between the frontal lobe and amygdala, allowing the frontal lobe to control the amygdala more effectively. Finally, after consistent exercise over time, the frontal lobe's volume increases. Under these combined effects, the frontal lobe can better alleviate stress. The amygdala's stress response. Regarding specific exercise plans, the author also offers suggestions. Scientific research shows that aerobic training is more effective than strength training for boosting stress resilience. So, we should engage more in cardiovascular exercises like running and swimming, at least 2 to 3 times a week, each session lasting at least 20 minutes. We've covered the first benefit of exercise for mood, enhancing stress resilience. Its second benefit is reducing depressive symptoms. Since the 1980s, many studies have shown that physical exercise has significant effects in reducing depressive symptoms. In an experiment, American psychologist James Blumenthal assigned one group of depressed patients to take antidepressants like Zoloft, and another group to not take medication but exercise 3 times a week for 30 minutes each. After 4 months, most people in both groups experienced relief from depression. And the number and proportion of symptom relief in the exercise group were the same as in the medication group. To determine the long-term effects of exercise on depression, Blumenthal continued to follow these patients.
6 months.
During these 6 months, patients could freely decide whether to take medication or exercise. The results show that those who chose to continue exercising had the lowest depression relapse rate, only 1/10 to 1/8, whereas those who chose to continue taking medication had a relapse rate as high as 1/3. And why can exercise reduce depressive symptoms? Scientists believe 3 chemical substances are related to depression: dopamine, serotonin, and norepinephrine. They transmit signals between brain cells. Dopamine boosts motivation and attention.
High dopamine levels bring happiness and motivation. Low levels cause listlessness. Serotonin calms overactive brain cells, creating calmness and harmony.
Serotonin deficiency can cause feelings of mania and anxiety. Norepinephrine affects alertness and attention. Insufficient levels lead to fatigue and frustration. When levels of these substances drop too low, people may develop depressive symptoms. Popular antidepressants work by boosting these substances, like Prozac raising serotonin. Physical exercise similarly elevates their levels. Within hours after exercise, levels of these brain chemicals rise. More exercise means longer-lasting elevation. With consistent long-term benefits, these substance levels remain elevated for up to 24 hours post-workout. Beyond these, many scientists link depression to brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF, hereafter called neurotrophin. This protein produced in the cortex and hippocampus protects brain cells from oxygen deprivation and toxins. Additionally, neurotrophin promotes new brain cell growth, strengthens neural connections, and enhances learning and memory. Scientists find depressed patients
typically have low neurotrophin levels, which rise after treatment. The exact BDNF depression relationship remains inconclusive.
Scientists hypothesize that insufficient neurotrophin may cause inadequate new brain cell growth, triggering depression. Due to neurotrophin's composition, we can't obtain it through medication or injections. The human body blocks external neurotrophin from entering the brain. Currently, exercise is the most effective way to boost neurotrophin levels. Scientists found the brain immediately produces new neurotrophin when exercise begins and continues production for hours afterward. After consistent exercise, the brain also increases neurotrophin production during workouts. Even after stopping exercise, neurotrophin remains elevated for 2 weeks before declining. Currently, scientists believe running shows the most significant improvement for depression. The author recommends running at least 3 times weekly for 45 minutes each, persisting for 6 weeks to see effects. For those unable to run, daily 30-minute walks can also alleviate depression. Despite emphasizing exercise's benefits, the author isn't against antidepressants. They're indeed effective. Depression patients should actively seek medical help and take medication as prescribed. The author also doesn't recommend stopping medication immediately after starting exercise.
He believes the best treatment combines medication with exercise to maximize effectiveness.
All right, let's summarize part 1. Exercise enables smoother functioning of the hippocampus and frontal lobe, alleviating the amygdala's stress response and boosting resilience. Exercise also elevates levels of specific brain chemicals, reducing depressive symptoms. Having covered exercise's positive impacts on mood,
Next, in part 2, we'll discuss how exercise enhances cognitive abilities.
the author outlines 3 cognitive benefits of exercise. The first benefit is improving attention. There is a disorder that's gained widespread attention over the past decade. Its full name is Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder, commonly known as ADHD. Currently, nearly 12% of U.S. children have ADHD. Main symptoms include inattention, distractibility, impulsive behavior, and excessive activity. However, this is a general description. Actual diagnosis requires professional evaluation, considering multiple factors. The book introduces 2 causes of ADHD.
The first cause involves the brain's nucleus accumbens.
The nucleus accumbens is a cluster of brain cells connecting many brain regions, considered by scientists as the brain's reward center. When dopamine levels rise in the nucleus accumbens, it activates, making us feel motivated and focused. For example, when watching TV, interesting content raises dopamine enough to keep you focused. Otherwise, you get distracted seeking higher dopamine activities, like scrolling phones or gaming. Dopamine must bind to receptors on brain cells to create pleasure. Without enough receptors for binding, dopamine's activating effect weakens. Studies show many ADHD patients have fewer dopamine receptors in the nucleus accumbens. Thus, their brains need stronger stimuli and more dopamine to activate. For neurotypical people, completing tasks or focusing in class relies heavily on the nucleus accumbens. The dopamine from such stimuli sufficiently activates it, enabling concentration. But for ADHD patients, these stimuli aren't enough, so they feel bored and distracted.
ADHD's second cause is insufficient dopamine secretion. Some have naturally low levels even with normal receptors. Activation fails. Beyond this, dopamine aids attention in other ways too. And
one key function is blocking distractions. Imagine reading in a cafe. Initially, you hear all surrounding noise, but external noise gradually fades, letting you focus on reading. Beyond external noise, internal noise exists. Random thoughts popping into our minds. For instance, suddenly recalling a song, memory, or friend. This also breaks concentration. Dopamine helps block both external and internal distractions. With insufficient dopamine, people get easily distracted by this noise. Thus, regardless of ADHD's cause, boosting dopamine levels addresses it. This is how most ADHD medications work.
as mentioned earlier, exercise boosts dopamine levels, making people more focused and calm afterward.
Moreover, Exercise's attention-boosting effects appear after very short workout sessions. Research shows ADHD children's attention improves after just 5 minutes of exercise, and it enhances attention in neurotypical individuals too. In one study, scientists recruited 200 pairs of 17-year-old identical twins, asking parents to rate their children's attention levels. 3 years later, parents re-rated them. Results showed most people's attention improved with age, but even with identical genes and environment, the more physically active twin consistently had better attention. Oh, exercise's benefits for cognitive abilities. The second benefit is improving memory. Here we mention the hippocampus again. It not only regulates the amygdala's stress response, but also serves as the brain's short-term memory storage. New information first stores in the hippocampus before transferring to the cerebral cortex for long-term memory formation. If the hippocampus malfunctions, we struggle to remember things. Exercise affects the hippocampus in 3 ways. First, it increases hippocampal volume. Human brains peak around age 25, then naturally shrink yearly. Hippocampus shrinks about 1% annually with age. Scientists once believed this shrinkage irreversible, but new research overturned that view. In one study, scientists MRI scanned 120 people's brains, measuring hippocampal volume. Participants were divided. One group did heart rate raising endurance exercises like running. The other did low-intensity activities like stretching without heart rate changes. After 1 year, remeasurements showed the low-activity group's hippocampus shrank by 1.4% on average. But the endurance group's hippocampus grew by 2%, and healthier individuals showed greater volume increases. Why does exercise enlarge the hippocampus? Scientists speculate this relates to neurotrophin. As mentioned earlier, neurotrophin promotes brain cell growth, and exercise boosts its production in the brain. Further research found the hippocampus produces the most neurotrophin. Those with the greatest hippocampal volume increase also showed the highest neurotrophin levels. Exercise's second effect on the hippocampus is resisting genetic aging. Scientists studied genes in mice hippocampal cells and found cell growth genes become less active with age. This leads to fewer new hippocampal cells and gradual atrophy. Further studies showed mice running daily on treadmills for 2 months suppressed genetic aging, keeping genes active to produce more hippocampal cells. This slows hippocampal atrophy. Exercise's third effect on the hippocampus is increasing blood supply. The hippocampus requires energy to function normally. This energy comes from blood flowing through the hippocampus. Using MRI scans, scientists found hippocampal blood supply increases during and after exercise. This also helps the hippocampus retain more information. Research shows 6 weeks of consistent exercise significantly improves memory. Different exercises affect memory differently. Running and strength training both aid word recall. Strength training has a stronger effect on associative memory, like matching names to faces. So, for comprehensive memory improvement, engage in various exercise types. The third cognitive benefit is enhanced creativity. Historically, many creative figures believed walking sparks inspiration. While writing On the Origin of Species, Darwin often walked near home for an hour to ponder questions. Steve Jobs held walking meetings with employees, discussing work while strolling. Stanford scientists confirmed through research that walking indeed boosts creativity. They had 176 participants take different creativity tests. Some took tests after walking. Others took tests after resting. Results showed the walking group scored 60% better on creativity tests. It's important to note that creativity comes in many different forms. In this test, the walking group's improvement mainly showed in generating more novel ideas. For example, how many different uses can you think of for a brick? The walking group could propose more creative answers, but for logic-focused creativity like solving puzzles, the walking group showed no advantage. Why does exercise boost creativity? The author gives 2 reasons. First, exercise increases cerebral blood flow, giving the brain more energy for thinking. Second, dopamine levels also relate to creativity. There's a brain region called the thalamus that acts as an information filter. It decides which information reaches the conscious level of the cerebral cortex. Dopamine inhibits the thalamus's filtering. Exercise increases dopamine, so the cortex receives more information, leading to multi-perspective thinking and creativity. From this, running boosts creativity more effectively than walking, because running increases blood flow and dopamine production more significantly. The author recommends at least 30 minutes of jogging to enhance creativity. For several hours afterward, we can think more effectively. However, the author cautions against running too fast or long. Stop before exhaustion, as tired brains have reduced blood flow and impaired thinking. All right, we've covered exercise's impacts on attention, memory, and creativity. Exercise's cognitive benefits extend beyond just these three areas. Long-term, exercise comprehensively enhances cognitive abilities, making people smarter. In Sweden, all 18-year-old males must enlist. New recruits undergo physical fitness and IQ tests upon entry.
Over 20 years, more than 1.2 million young men completed these tests.
Scientists analyzing this data found a clear correlation between physical fitness and IQ. Those excelling in fitness tests generally had higher IQs. Among identical twins sharing genes and environment, the fitter twin consistently had higher IQ. The author attributes this to long-term exercise promoting growth across brain regions. The brain can be divided into gray matter and white matter. Gray matter, also known as the cerebral cortex, is the outermost layer of the brain. The hippocampus and frontal lobe are both part of gray matter. Higher cognitive activities occur in gray matter, which accounts for 40% of the brain's volume, but consumes over 90% of its energy. As mentioned earlier, exercise increases the volume of the hippocampus and frontal lobe, and this effect also applies to other parts of gray matter. At the same time, exercise promotes the growth of blood vessels in the brain, providing more blood supply to gray matter. All this helps improve cognitive abilities. Below gray matter is white matter, made up of axons from brain cells, which brain cells use to communicate with each other. If we compare gray matter to a computer, white matter is like the wires connecting its various components. Scientific research has found that white matter becomes denser and more compact with exercise, meaning that different brain regions can communicate more effectively, making the whole brain function better. So, all right, let's summarize the content of part 2. Exercise boosts dopamine levels, thereby improving attention. Exercise increases the volume of the hippocampus, slows down genetic aging in the hippocampus, and increases its blood supply, which helps improve memory. Increased blood supply to the brain and elevated dopamine levels also help enhance creativity. So far, we've explained the physiological effects of exercise on the brain from a neuroscience perspective, and the author also analyzes in the book why exercise benefits the brain from an evolutionary perspective. Human ancestors emerged hundreds of thousands of years ago on the African savanna. For a long period, humans were hunters on the savanna until about 10,000 years ago. Humans only entered agricultural society, and the industrial society emerged just over 200 years ago. From an evolutionary perspective, our brains are essentially still savanna hunters. For hunters to survive, they needed to engage in a lot of movement, hunting animals, avoiding dangers, and finding new dwellings. Since movement was so crucial for survival, over the long history of hunting, the brain evolved to encourage movement. When we finish exercising, the brain interprets the movement as going out to find food or a better dwelling. Thus, the brain secretes dopamine and serotonin as rewards, making people feel happy. During hunting, attention is very important. Hunters must avoid predator attacks while judging the right moment to strike. During exercise, the brain assumes we're hunting, thus enhancing attention. Additionally, hunters must memorize environmental details when seeking new water sources and dwellings to avoid getting lost later. Therefore, the brain boosts memory too. All its traits evolved to help us survive through movement. The most suitable lifestyle for the brain is maintaining physical activity. With this, we've nearly covered all key points from Brain Gym. Regarding specific exercise routines, individuals can arrange according to their circumstances. The author concludes with a recommendation. Exercise at least 3 times weekly for about 45 minutes per session, primarily aerobic training. Combine this with strength training, ensuring noticeable heart rate elevation during workouts. If persist for 6 months, you'll experience significant improvements across all brain functions. All right, this concludes our interpretation of Brain Gym. Reading notes are below the audio. See you next time.